You all think I'm joking.
I have bomb! I will blow this train!
The 4:12 p.m. northbound Amtrak train from New York Penn Station to Albany Rensselaer was running 6 minutes behind schedule. No one on board knew that the delay would be the only reason some of them would later say they were lucky to be alive. Passengers settled into the rhythm of a weekday commute. Business laptops snapped open. A mother passed crackers to a restless toddler. An elderly couple compared photos on a tablet. The overhead announcements hummed through the cabin speakers with practiced calm. In Car 7, Seat 14A, Mark Delaney stared out the window. He had worked for Amtrak for 9 years. Until 3 weeks ago. He had memorized the routes, the maintenance schedules, the shift rotations, the blind spots between station stops where signal coverage dipped. He knew which cars were typically less crowded midweek. He knew how the train breathed when it picked up speed, and he knew exactly where to sit. The severance meeting replayed in his mind for the 100th time. Position eliminated. Budget restructuring. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. After 9 years of overtime. After holidays missed. After fixing failures before supervisors even knew there was a problem. Mark had not raised his voice in that meeting. He had smiled. That, his wife would later say, was what frightened her most. 2 rows behind him, Vincent Harper, 27, adjusted the paper wrapping around a bouquet of white lilies and pale blue roses. He checked his watch. If the train stayed on time, he would reach Albany by 6:40 p.m. Just enough daylight left to surprise Emily Lawson outside the Riverside restaurant where he planned to propose. Vincent's palms were damp, but for entirely different reasons than the man seated ahead of him. He reviewed the small velvet box in his pocket again, as if rehearsing courage. Across the aisle sat Stephanie Morris, a financial analyst answering emails at alarming speed. Further down, a college student named Jared Kim leaned into noise-canceling headphones. Toward the back of the car, conductor Steve Ramirez moved methodically through the aisle checking tickets. Everything about Car 7 looked ordinary. That was the problem. Mark preferred ordinary. It made disruption louder. At 4:31 p.m., the train cleared Yonkers and picked up speed along the Hudson River. Mark reached into his backpack. Not hurried, not shaking. He had spent weeks thinking through every possibility, every outcome. He had imagined headlines, imagined his former supervisor watching live news footage, imagined regret. He had imagined silence afterward. The device inside his bag wasn't sophisticated, but it didn't need to be. It only needed to threaten. He wasn't looking for destruction. He was looking for attention. Mark exhaled slowly and stood. Vincent noticed first. Not because of what Mark held, but because of how he moved. Deliberate. Focused. Detached. Mark stepped into the aisle and cleared his throat. "Everyone," he said. No one reacted at first. He raised his voice just enough. "Everyone needs to listen to me." The cabin fell into uneasy quiet. Conductor Steve Ramirez turned from the back of the car. Mark placed his backpack on an empty seat and unzipped it slowly. "I worked for this company for nearly a decade," he began. "And today, they're going to hear me." A woman near the window laughed nervously. "Is this a joke?" Mark reached inside the bag and revealed enough wiring and metal casing to make the laughter die instantly. Gasps rippled down the car. Vincent's fingers tightened around the bouquet. Stephanie froze mid-typing. Steve Ramirez took one step forward. "Sir," he said carefully, "let's talk about this." Mark lifted a small handheld switch. "No one moves," he replied calmly. "No one calls anyone. The train continues north." Silence collapsed over the car like a dropped curtain. Panic doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like stillness. A toddler began to whimper. Jared slowly removed his headphones. Stephanie's breathing grew shallow. Vincent felt his heartbeat in his throat. He'd seen this posture before. Years earlier, during a college internship with the NYPD, Vincent had shadowed officers during crisis intervention training. He wasn't an officer, just a criminal justice major observing negotiation simulations. He remembered something his mentor, Detective Harold Benson, had repeated. The most dangerous moment is not the threat. It's the escalation. Vincent swallowed. Mark wasn't shouting. He wasn't sweating. He was composed. That made him unpredictable. Conductor Ramirez raised his hands slightly. "Sir, what's your name?" "Mark." "Mark," Steve said gently, "you don't have to do this." "I already did," Mark replied. "The second they fired me." He began pacing slowly down the aisle. "They think we're disposable. They think none of this runs because of us. Today they'll understand." The train roared through a narrow bend in the track. Stephanie's phone vibrated in her lap. She didn't dare look at it. Vincent noticed Mark's grip on the switch. Not tight, but steady. This wasn't impulse. This was rehearsal. Mark stopped beside a window and stared out at the blur of trees. "I gave them everything," he muttered. "And they erased me." A man in the back whispered, "Oh my God!" Mark turned sharply. "I said no talking." The whisperer shrank back into his seat. Vincent inhaled carefully through his nose. He remembered another lesson. Don't challenge the ego. Don't contradict the emotion. Join the feeling before you redirect it. But he stayed silent. Not yet. Too early. At 4:46 p.m., the train approached a stretch of track with weaker cell reception. Mark smiled faintly. He had planned this moment. "Phones out," he ordered. On the floor. One by one, passengers complied. The soft thuds of smartphones hitting carpet echoed like surrender. Vincent hesitated, then placed his phone down as well. He couldn't call anyone. No one could. Car 7 was now its own world. Steve Ramirez tried again. "Mark, there are families here." "And there were families when I was fired," Mark snapped. "Did they care about mine?" His voice cracked slightly. There it was. The first fracture. Vincent saw it. Mark's anger wasn't explosive. It was wounded. That distinction mattered. Mark's eyes drifted toward the bouquet in Vincent's hands. "What's that for?" he asked. Vincent's throat tightened. "My fiancée," he answered truthfully. A flicker passed across Mark's face. "You still think life goes the way you plan it," he said bitterly. Vincent didn't reply. "Not yet." Mark returned to pacing. Minutes felt like hours. The train continued north. Outside, commuters on parallel highways had no idea what was unfolding inside Car 7. Mark stopped near the center of the aisle and addressed the passengers again. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said. "But I will if they force me to." Force. He needed an opponent. Vincent's mind worked quickly. If law enforcement intercepted the train at the next station, the situation could escalate fast. Mark was holding a trigger. Any sudden movement could mean disaster. Vincent glanced at Steve Ramirez. The conductor's jaw was tight, but his eyes were scanning, calculating, waiting. At 4:59 p.m., the train conductor's radio crackled faintly from his belt. Mark's head snapped up. What was that? "Just routine," Steve said calmly. Mark's finger twitched slightly on the switch. The toddler in the front row began crying loudly now. Mark closed his eyes for a brief second. Noise overwhelmed him. Vincent felt the shift. The moment was changing. Mark was no longer in control of the atmosphere. The atmosphere was pressing back. Vincent's heart pounded. He knew waiting too long could be worse than speaking too soon. He slowly stood. "Sit down," someone hissed. Mark turned. "You. Stay seated." Vincent lifted his hands slightly. "I'm not moving forward," he said evenly. "I just want to talk." Mark studied him. Passengers held their breath. Vincent's bouquet trembled slightly, whether from nerves or the motion of the train, he couldn't tell. Mark's eyes narrowed. "You think you can fix this?" Vincent met his gaze. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But I think you deserve to be heard." Mark didn't respond immediately. The train thundered across a steel bridge. The Hudson River shimmered below. Inside car 7, 43 lives balanced on the smallest movement of a thumb. Mark tilted his head slightly. "Then talk," he said. And that was the moment everything truly began. The train roared over the bridge, steel vibrating beneath it. Mark Delaney stood in the aisle of car 7, one hand gripping the handheld switch, the other hanging loosely at his side. "Then talk," he said. Vincent Harper swallowed. His pulse was loud in his ears, but his voice when it came was steady. "Okay," he began quietly. "My name's Vincent." Mark didn't respond. Vincent didn't move forward. He didn't look at the device. He didn't look at the wiring. He kept his eyes on Mark's face. That was the first rule he remembered from Detective Harold Benson during his NYPD internship. Look at the person, not the weapon. "You worked here 9 years?" Vincent asked gently. Mark's jaw tightened. "Almost 10. "That's a long time," Vincent nodded. "That's not disposable." Mark's fingers flexed slightly on the switch. "They treated it like it was." Vincent didn't contradict him. He didn't say, "Maybe they had reasons." He didn't say, "There are other jobs." Instead, he said, "That must have felt humiliating." The word landed. Humiliating. Not angry. Not unstable. Humiliated. Mark's breathing shifted. "You don't know anything about it." "You're right," Vincent said immediately. "I don't. That's why I'm asking." He kept his tone low, almost conversational, as if they were the only 2 people on the train. Behind him, 43 passengers sat frozen. Conductor Steve Ramirez stood perfectly still, understanding instinctively that this was not the moment to interrupt. Vincent continued. "Did they explain it clearly? Or was it one of those meetings where they use a lot of words but don't really say anything?" Mark gave a short, humorless laugh. "They called it restructuring." "That's a word people use when they don't want to say, 'You don't matter,'" Vincent replied softly. Mark looked at him sharply. For the first time, the anger in his expression flickered, not disappearing, but cracking. Vincent saw it. That crack was the opening. Another lesson from training surfaced. Label the emotion. Validate the feeling. Don't validate the behavior. "You gave them your time," Vincent said. "Your experience. You probably trained half the people still working there." Mark's grip tightened slightly, but not dangerously. Just reflexively. "I built half their system redundancies," he said. "When something didn't fail, it was because of me." Vincent nodded. "So when they erased you, it felt like they erased your work too." Mark didn't answer. But his silence was no longer explosive. It was reflective. The train slowed slightly as it approached a curve. Vincent took that as a cue to slow his pacing too. He lowered himself back into his seat, slowly making sure Mark saw that he was not advancing. That was important. Reduce perceived threat. "I don't think you want to hurt anyone here," Vincent said carefully. Mark's eyes hardened again. "Don't tell me what I want." "Okay," Vincent corrected himself quickly. "You're right. I can't tell you that. Let me ask instead." He leaned forward slightly. If this ends with people getting hurt, does that actually make them hear you? The question hung heavy. Mark stared past him toward the front of the car. Vincent pressed gently. You said you want them to understand. If this becomes a tragedy, they won't talk about the restructuring. They'll talk about this. He gestured lightly to the tension-filled cabin. They'll call you unstable, dangerous. They'll erase the 9 years. Mark's breathing grew uneven. That's what they already did. But right now, Vincent said, keeping his voice calm, you still control how this story ends. Control. The word mattered. People in crisis often feel powerless. Mark wasn't seeking destruction. He was seeking agency. Vincent leaned into that. You've got everyone's attention, he continued, including mine, including the conductors, including the companies, whether they admit it or not. Mark didn't deny it. You don't have to prove your pain by destroying yourself, Vincent added. There it was. The second fracture. Mark's eyes flickered down briefly, not at the device, but at his own hand holding it. Vincent noticed. Behind him, Stephanie Morris wiped silent tears from her face. The toddler's crying had quieted to soft hiccups. Conductor Ramirez subtly shifted his weight, ready but not interfering. Vincent took a slow breath. He remembered Detective Benson once saying, "When someone feels unheard, your job is not to overpower them. It's to outlast the silence." "Mark," Vincent said gently, "what happens after this?" Mark's face tightened. "What do you mean?" "Let's say you press it. Let's say the worst happens. What happens to your wife? Your family?" Mark's jaw clenched. Vincent had guessed, but the wedding ring on Mark's finger confirmed it. "You think I haven't thought about that?" Mark snapped. "I think you have," Vincent replied immediately. "Which means you still care." That word lingered. "Care." "You said you built systems so nothing would fail," Vincent continued. "You're a fixer." Mark exhaled sharply. "That's what I did." "Then fix this," Vincent said quietly. The train rattled across another set of tracks. Vincent kept going slow, steady. Show them the man who built their safeguards, not the man they'll label as a threat. Mark's hand trembled slightly, now not from anger, but from emotional overload. "You don't understand," he muttered. "When they fired me, I felt invisible." Vincent nodded. "I believe you. That was it. No correction. No lecture. Just belief." Mark's eyes grew glossy. The entire car remained frozen. Vincent lowered his voice even further. "I'm on this train to propose," he said softly. "I thought today was going to be the biggest moment of my life." Mark's eyes shifted to the bouquet again. Vincent continued, "But right now, this moment is bigger. And you're the only one who can decide if it ends with hope or headlines." The words were deliberate, not confrontational, choice-oriented. Another technique: offer dignity in the exit. "You don't have to disappear to be heard," Vincent added. Mark's breathing grew heavier. He looked around the car at the passengers, at the conductor, at the crying child now clinging to her mother. For the first time, he saw them not as witnesses but as people. The illusion of isolation shattered. "Put the switch down, Mark," Vincent said softly. Not as a command, as an invitation. Mark's hand shook. Seconds stretched. No one moved. The train's wheels screamed lightly against the rails as it began to slow, approaching the next station, Poughkeepsie. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance outside. Mark closed his eyes. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," he whispered. "I know," Vincent replied immediately. That affirmation mattered. Mark slowly lowered his hand. The device hovered inches above the seat. Vincent did not rush him, did not stand. Did not break eye contact. You're still in control, Vincent said quietly. Make the choice you can live with. The train slowed further. Mark's fingers loosened. The switch slipped from his grip and landed harmlessly on the fabric seat. Gasps broke through the car. Conductor Ramirez moved quickly but calmly, stepping forward and securing the device without sudden motion. Police officers boarded seconds later, weapons lowered but ready. Mark didn't resist. He stood still as officers gently restrained him. His shoulders slumped, not defeated. Relieved. The train finally came to a complete stop. Passengers began sobbing, hugging, breathing again. Vincent sank back into his seat, bouquet still clutched tightly in his hands. His entire body trembled now that adrenaline had nowhere left to go. Conductor Ramirez approached him. "You just saved this train," he said quietly. Vincent shook his head. He saved himself. News of the incident spread quickly. Passenger de-escalates crisis on Amtrak train. Former employee surrenders without injury. Mark Delaney was charged, but no one had been harmed. And investigators later confirmed something crucial. The device had been real enough to threaten. But the tragedy had been avoided by inches equals and by words. 3 weeks later, Vincent Harper stood in a modest ceremony room at NYPD headquarters. Detective Harold Benson was there, smiling faintly. "You remembered," Benson said. Vincent nodded. "I remembered to listen." The department formally offered him a position in crisis intervention training. His internship years earlier had not been forgotten. Neither had what he'd done on that train. That evening, Vincent finally made it to Albany. The bouquet slightly wilted but still beautiful. Emily said yes. And somewhere in a holding cell miles away, Mark Delaney sat quietly. Not erased. Not invisible. Just a man who had stepped back from the edge. Because someone chose to speak. And chose to listen.